Chapter 18 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 18 When the Sun Shines at Midnight. The Scandinavian Peninsula is often called the Land of the Midnight Sun, because its northern part lies within the Arctic Circle, so far north that in the summer the daylight lasts for months, when the sun can be seen the whole 24 hours, and in the winter there is continuous darkness for months. This is true of only the northern part of the Scandinavian Peninsula, although the whole of it is so far north that the summer days are much longer and the winter days much shorter than ours. We shall notice this as we go onward from place to place through it, even as far south as Christiania and Stockholm. One can read after 10 o'clock at night in summer out of doors, and when we go to bed we shall hang our traveling rugs over the windows to darken the room so we can sleep. We begin our explorations by a trip to the land of long days and long nights, for we wish to see for ourselves how the sun looks at midnight. The journey will give us some idea of Norway and of the general character of the Scandinavian Peninsula. Scandinavia is the largest peninsula of Europe. It is a vast body of land, more than 4 times as big as New England, rising abruptly out of the Atlantic Ocean and sloping somewhat toward the east and south to the Gulf of Bothnia and the Baltic Sea. The land is rugged and mountainous. In the north there are snow-clad peaks and enormous glaciers. Farther south the mountains uphold high wooded plains with many gorges or canyons running through them. Some of the mountains are steep, and countless streams dash down their sides. The peninsula has also numerous lakes, many of them joined by canals. In Norway alone there are 3,000, while in Sweden the lakes cover almost 1/10 of the country. Norway is much more rainy than Sweden. The winds from the ocean precipitate most of their moisture as they strike the mountains, and when they descend the opposite slopes to the Baltic they are comparatively dry. Along the Atlantic Ocean there is a mountain wall, with many great breaks or chasms in it. Some of these chasms extend 100 miles into the land, forming ocean avenues, as it were, by which the ships can stream far into the interior. These narrow arms of the sea are called fjords. They are of great value in commerce and trade, and the people have built nearly all their towns and villages upon them. They give Norway and Sweden a coastline so long that if it could be stretched out it would reach more than halfway round the world. But we shall see this better as we go in our steamer along the shore to the North Cape. We make the trip leisurely, stopping now and then for a journey into the interior by the fjords. Now we have entered one of these great breaks in the mountain wall. We are sailing up a mighty ravine right into the heart of the country. The walls of trees, moss, and bushes rise above us, so high that we seem to be roofed with the blue sky. Lean over the side of the boat and look down. How clear the water is! It is 100 feet deep, yet we can see bottom, and as the vessel slows up we observe the fishes swimming about far below us. Now we have gone farther inland. We have lost sight of the ocean through a turn in the fjord, and we seem to be traveling through a mountain-walled canyon. Hear that noise which comes from the front? Ask the pilot to guide the boat more to the left. The noise is made by the great volume of water dashing down into the fjord from the cliff on the right. That is a mountain stream which is taking its last plunge on its way to the sea. Now we are almost under it. Does it not look like a torrent falling out of the sky? Now we have gone past. The sun is shining through the spray, turning it into myriads of diamonds and painting rainbows high above the surface of the fjord. As we go still farther inland, the height of the walls decreases. We find little towns and villages along the banks, and now and then a small city. The houses are like great wooden boxes on foundations of stone. The walls are painted red, white, gray, or yellow, and the buildings look very pretty against the background of green. Now we are back again in the ocean and on our way to the north. How smooth the sea is! This is because of the islands which everywhere line the coast of Norway. They form a breakwater against the storms, and give the sailors a quiet ocean channel from one end of their country to the other. Is it any wonder that with these fjords, this great sea coast, and this easy sailing coast channel, the Norwegians should have many seamen? They, as well as their brothers of Sweden, have an enormous number of ships. They do much trading and fishing, and you may find their merchant vessels in all parts of the world. We stay for a day at Trondhjem on a great fjord, and are surprised to find, away up here at the north, a city of about 50,000, with wide streets, good pavements, and fine buildings. It has also shipbuilding yards, lumber mills, and fish packing houses. We visit the cathedral, one of the oldest in Europe, and the one in which the Norwegian kings are crowned. It is built of blue-colored slate, and some parts of it are beautifully carved. Trondhjem is the third city of Norway, and it is an important seaport and railroad town. It is connected with Christiania by a railroad 350 miles long. It has also much shipping, and its harbor is open all the year round, although it is several hundred miles farther north than northern Labrador. It is nearer the North Pole than the mouth of the Yukon River in Alaska, and it is on about the same parallel of latitude as southern Iceland. All of these countries are frozen up during the winter, and most of them have 6 to 8 months of ice. Why is it that Trondhjem does not freeze too? It is on account of the prevailing westerly winds, which are kept warm by the drift from the Gulf Stream. The warm Gulf Stream, having flowed along our Atlantic coast, supplies to the northern Atlantic a vast amount of warm water, which is drifted across the ocean by the westerly winds, and keeps them warm. These winds give the British Isles a temperate climate, and then flood the coast of Norway with a bath of warm air. The drift water is so warm that all the harbors along the west coast of Norway are free from ice during the winter, while the harbors of the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Bothnia are frozen. The greater part of Norway would be uninhabitable were it not for the water-warmed westerly wind. The people owe their food, their commerce, their very lives to it. Were it not for its heat, the fjords would be blocked with ice, and the coast be as cold and barren and desolate as Labrador. A part of Sweden is colder in winter than Norway, although both countries are covered with snow for months at a time. The people go about upon sleds and skates, and they travel from one place to another upon long snowshoes or skis. They have tobogganing parties and enjoy themselves coasting down the steep hills. Leaving Trondhjem, we sail northward inside the islands by snow-clad mountains, upon the sides of which great glaciers hang. We cross the Arctic Circle and then stay for a day at Tromso to have a look at a village of Laplanders not far away. Some of the Lapps live in tents made of skins stretched upon poles, with a hole in the top for the smoke to go out. Others have huts of stone and earth, but everything is of the rudest description. The people gather round us as we walk through their little town, offering to pose for our cameras. How dirty they are, and how small! They look like dwarfs. The men are about 5 feet tall, and the women about 6 inches shorter. They are dressed in reindeer skins, with the fur on the inside. They belong to the yellow race, and their complexions are almost as yellow as their leather clothing, their skins having been darkened by the smoke which fills their tents the greater part of the time. The little Lapps look and dress just like their parents. All have high cheekbones, flat noses, and large mouths. Their eyes are small and black and often twinkling with laughter. They seem good-natured, and for a few coppers will allow themselves to be photographed as often as we wish. We see but few reindeer about Tromso. They are to be found farther back in the country, where nearly every Lapp has his own herd, and where the people live largely upon reindeer meat and reindeer milk. They milk the reindeer just as we milk our cows, but they can keep milk better than we can with all our ice chests and spring houses, for it is so cold in the winter where the Lapps live that they freeze the milk into hard blocks, after which it will keep for months, and they can use it as they need it. Many of the Laplanders are nomads. That is, they have no settled habitation. It takes quite a large space to support a reindeer, for the vegetation is scanty in these northern latitudes, and the people drive the deer from place to place to find pasture. In traveling, many of them use reindeer sledges, upon which their tents and other things are carried. The reindeer can travel very fast, and they take the place of horses in all the lands along the Arctic coast of Europe. From Tromsø we steam on to Hammerfest to get a look at the northernmost town of the world before going to the Cape. It is early morning when we cast anchor in the harbor, but we are now so far north that it is light throughout the whole night. We are far beyond the latitude of Iceland, beyond that of Cape Brewster in Greenland, farther north in the gold diggings of the Klondike in Alaska, and in seas which, were it not for the Gulf Stream, would be filled with ice almost all the year round. Hammerfest is a thriving city. It contains about 3,000 people, who dwell in hundreds of wooden 1- and 2-story houses on the edge of the sea. It has a telegraph station and weekly newspapers. We eat our dinner at a good hotel and find that the people live well here at the northern extremity of the world. They have very long winters, but in the summer for months the sun shines all day and almost all night as well. The plants then grow very rapidly, and vegetables mature in much less time than with us. Now we are again on our way to the north. We have left Hammerfest, and in 7 hours shall be at the North Cape, the northern extremity of Magero Island, and at the northernmost point of Europe. We have been within the Arctic Circle for days, and are now sailing through the Arctic Ocean. The water is clear, and of a beautiful blue. It is not very cold, for we are still floating upon the warm drift of the Gulf Stream, although we now and then see an iceberg, and we are always in sight of the glaciers on the mountains of Norway. How fresh the air is, and how pure! The winds blow continually, so that we almost have to fight our way from the stern of the boat to the prow. Now we are steaming amongst islands, with birds in great flocks soaring about in the air over our heads. There are scores of seagulls following the steamer, and hundreds of black and white eider ducks flying over the islands. The ducks are of value for their feathers, which are so soft and light that they make excellent wadding for quilts. They are also used for trimming cloaks and for collars, muffs, wraps, and other such things. The ducks build nests of twigs and rushes, and line them with soft feathers which they pluck from their own breasts. Our captain tells us the ducks are protected by law, as many people make their living by gathering the feathers. The hunters, when they find a nest, are careful not to destroy it. They merely take out the feather lining, after which the ducks will line them once again. When they have been twice robbed, they will slip off and build a nest somewhere else. As we go on among the islands, we pass many rocks, half submerged by the sea. See that one away over there at the right? It apparently has a geyser upon it, for it is spouting water high into the air. See, it is moving. Take your field glass and look again. That is not an island at all. It is a whale. There are many whales in these waters, and many ships are engaged in catching them for their oil and whalebone. There, the great whale has dived, and we see him no more. We sail on until at last, rounding a great bleak point of rocks, we enter the harbor of the North Cape, and drop our anchor in a little bay surrounded by mountains, on some of which snow can be seen. We take out our lines and amuse ourselves fishing while we wait for the hour when we are to see the sun shining at midnight. How slowly the time goes, and how strange is this turning of night into day! The sun was already high in the heavens at about 3 o'clock this morning, when we came into Hammerfest, and when we think of all we have seen since then, the day seems a week long, and it is hours yet till midnight. We look again and again at our watches, observing that the sun still stands high above the horizon. It is well up at 10:30 p.m. when we leave the ship for the shore. We have decided to climb the bluff which overhangs the harbor, for our midnight view of the King of the Heavens. The captain warns us that we must hurry back, for he wishes to leave as soon as we return. He gives us a boat, and we row to the land and walk along a rugged path through the rocks to the foot of the bluff. The way from here is so steep that we are glad to use the thick rope which has been passed through iron rings fastened by staples into the rock in order that travelers may help themselves up by it. The bluff is 900 feet high, but step by step we climb up its bleak sides to the top, and take our stand beside the brown stone monument which was erected here when Oscar II, King of Sweden, visited the Cape about a generation ago. We stop a moment trying to realize where we are as we look at the glorious scenes all about us. We are about as far north as man ever gets, if we except the few Arctic explorers who have risked their lives in trying to find the North Pole. We are at the northern edge of Europe, and are looking out upon the great polar world. To the north of us are the regions of icebergs, Eskimos, and polar bears. To our right and to our left, seas unsailed except by whaling and sealing ships extend on, a vast watery waste dotted here and there by icy islands where Jack Frost reigns supreme. And still it is wonderfully beautiful. We are gazing over the great Arctic Ocean, which is rolling about under a glorious sun. It looks not unlike the Atlantic, as we have seen it from the rocks of our New England coast, when the sun was still several hours from its setting. The scene is so fine that we almost forget the time, until we notice some rockets shooting up from the ship far below us. That is the signal from the captain for us to hurry, as he wishes to sail. We look at our watches, and lo, it is midnight. The sun is as far down as it will go during this 24 hours, and as near the horizon as it will get for months to come. We stand on the bluff and wave our American flags in honor of the occasion, while we sing Hail Columbia away up here on the mountain. We go to the edge of the bluff and throw stones down into the ocean, and as we look out over it, we feel that if we had not a large part of Europe yet to explore, we might easily take a boat and steam on to the pole. We wait for a few moments in order to say that we have seen the sunrise, although in this latitude there is little difference between its rising and setting, and then we say farewell and make our way down the bluff to our boat. We eat our breakfast on board about 2 o'clock in the morning. The cook has fried the fresh cod that we caught when we first came into the harbor, and to us, hungry from our climb up the hill, they seem sweeter than any fish ever eaten before. An hour later we are again in our cabins, which we have darkened by hanging our coats over the portholes, ready to take our first sleep after our long working day of more than 24 hours. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Geographical Reader, Europe by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 19. Travels in Norway and Sweden. We have left our steamer at Trondhjem and are going through Norway to Christiania by rail. The distance is less than 400 miles, but we spend several days on the journey, for we wish to study the country. We leave the train frequently and ride in carrioles from one town to another. The carrioles are little carts, not unlike our American sulkies, save that each carriole has a seat behind for the boy or girl whom the owner sends along to bring it back home. Our carrioles are drawn by Norwegian ponies. They are stocky little cream-colored beasts with long tails and short manes. They are so patient and gentle that we fall in love with them and wish we could send them home to America. They go very fast and will travel all day without tiring. Sometimes one goes too fast for our comfort. We pull on the reins and cry, "Whoa!" but the pony goes faster than ever. At last, in despair, we look back at the little boy riding behind. He laughs and then makes a noise like the loud purring of a cat, saying "Purr." The pony stops instantly, and we thus learn that "purr" means "whoa" in Norway. Much of our travel is through the forests for which Norway and Sweden are noted. Scandinavia has long been one of the chief lumber regions of Europe. In the northern part of the peninsula there are vast tracts of pine and fir, and in the south many beeches, elms, and other hardwood trees. About the best shipping timber used in England and on the continent comes from Scandinavia. Sweden sometimes exporting as much as $25 million worth of lumber a year. A great deal is shipped as logs, some as window sashes and doors, much as boards, and not a little split up into matches. Swedish matches light the fires of a great part of the world. So many are sold every year that if they were all loaded into 2-horse wagons at a ton to the wagon, it would take a line of teams more than 100 miles long to carry them all. Let us stop our carrioles and think for a moment of the possible future of this forest we are now passing through. There is a great pine which has been marked for cutting. Within a short time it will start on its travels to Holland to serve as a pile to support one of the great buildings of Amsterdam or Rotterdam. That tall tree beside it may form the mast of a German steamship which will carry goods to South Africa or China, and those others near by may be cut up into posts of from 3 to 9 feet in length to prop up the roofs of the tunnels in the coal mines of England. Farther on are some which may be ground into pulp to make printing paper, and they may again come before us in the newspapers which a little later we shall read at our breakfasts in Vienna or Rome. So musing, we go on through the woods and come out into cleared lands, where men, women, and children are cutting hay and curing it for winter. How different it is from the harvest scenes of our great Western farms! There are no mowing machines, nor iron rakes drawn by horses. There are no hay wagons such as we use. The men are cutting the grass with scythes, and the women are raking it together and carrying it in their arms to those racks of wood or wire at the sides of the field, where they tie it up in bundles and hang it out to dry in the sun and the wind, just as we dry our washing. It is so rainy that the people dare not let the hay lay on the ground. After it is cured, it is carried off to the barns by ponies in little wagons not much bigger than baby cribs, which move along on small wooden wheels. On some farms the hay is packed in baskets and carried home by the women on their backs, and on others, where the fields are high up, they tie the hay into bundles and slide it down on wire ropes to the barns. Sometimes buckets of milk are sent down from the hills in this way. The farms are so small and so rough that the people could not possibly use our heavy farming machinery. We stop at one of the farmhouses for lunch, and are told we can have bread and milk, fresh eggs, and salmon. The farmer's daughter first brings in the bread. It is of the kind known as flatbrød, which is used all over Norway. It is made of rye meal and water in thin cakes twice as big around as a dinner plate, and so hard and crisp that we break it like crackers. The fish and eggs follow. They are well cooked and delicious. We have excellent butter and very good cheese, and as we go on with our journey we find that the Norwegians live very well. They have but little meat in many parts of the country, but we can always get eggs and fish, and in the north we often have venison and reindeer steaks and roasts, with reindeer hash next day. The country people live plainly in all parts of Scandinavia. The houses are small, seldom containing more than 2 or 3 rooms, although one farmer may sometimes have several houses for himself and servants. Everyone works. We see women knitting away in the hay fields while resting, and in the evening find them spinning inside the houses. The women and girls make all the clothes of the family. They weave the cloth and cut out the garments and sew them. In some parts of Scandinavia they make beautiful lace. The people of one town will often follow only one pattern, stitching the same pattern over and over again from one generation to another. The men manufacture the most of their farming tools, and not a few make the harness for their ponies. The people are well educated. Children are compelled to attend school, and nearly everyone can read and write. Our train is now coming in to Christiania, the capital of Norway, and the second largest city in the Scandinavian peninsula. We take a carriage at the station and drive to our hotel, where we leave our baggage and then drive on through the city. Christiania is about as big as St. Paul, and quite as beautiful. Its wide streets are well paved and lined with large buildings of stone. There are many fine residences and public squares and parks. The people must be fond of flowers, for nearly every window has a row of plants in it. Christiania is situated on a wide, deep fjord, and large ocean steamers can sail up into the town. We visit the wharves and find there a steamer about starting out for Gothenburg, Sweden, and as we wish to cross Sweden by the celebrated Gotha Canal, which connects Gothenburg with the Baltic, we take passage. The ride is a short one, and we are soon again upon land. Gothenburg is the chief city on the west coast of Sweden. It was once famous as a fishing place, and it is now important as the western terminus of the Gotha Canal. We walk through its long, wide streets, bordered by canals walled with stone and crossed with bridges of iron. The city reminds us of the Dutch towns, and we enjoy its quaint old houses of brick, its beautiful parks, and its canal streets filled with shipping. We go out to the shipbuilding yards and also visit the factories where they are weaving linen and cotton cloth, and making all kinds of machinery, paper, matches, tobacco, and sugar. It is early morning when we start on our journey up the Gotha River and on into the canal. We steam around the high falls of Trollhättan into Lake Vänern. The canal is about 300 miles long, but it is so largely made up of lakes and rivers that it has only 50 miles of excavated waterways. Our boat is carried up past the falls by means of 11 great locks, and, after crossing the lake, we again rise by other locks until we are 300 feet above sea level, on the highest point between Lake Vänern and Lake Vättern. From the point we begin to descend. We fall from one level to another by means of locks, till at last we sail out into the Baltic Sea, and a few hours later are steaming into the capital of Sweden. Stockholm is a beautiful city. It lies on both sides of a channel which connects the Baltic Sea with Lake Mälar. We coast in and out among islands as we come in, and if we should go through into the lake beyond, we should find other islands, almost as many as the Thousand Islands in the St. Lawrence above Montreal. Stockholm is cut up by waterways. It has bridges connecting its islands, and its waterways are so many and so beautiful that it has been called the Venice of the North. Everywhere we look we see boats moving about. There are many ships at the quays. The vast buildings rise above up from the sea, so that the city looks as though it were built on the waves. We leave the ship and walk through the city. The streets are wide and well paved, and we cross at least 2 bridges every half mile. The buildings are large, and there are many 5-story structures with dormer windows stretching their heads out of the steep slanting roofs, as though asking what the weather might be. There are many statues, for the Swedes are noted as sculptors and are fond of the fine arts. We see children everywhere going to school. The Swedes are as well educated as any people of Europe, and there are very few of them who cannot read and write. They are energetic and so thrifty that when they emigrate to the United States, as many of them do every year, they soon become good American citizens. It is difficult to find stronger, more thrifty, and more intelligent people than those of Norway and Sweden. Centuries ago, when they were known as the Norsemen, they were noted for their bravery on sea and on land. Their war vessels sailed many seas, and they made themselves feared in their wars with the other peoples of northern Europe. Now they have proved themselves equally great in the arts of peace. Continuing with our walk, we pass parks and public gardens at frequent intervals. There are cafes in the gardens, and the family parties sitting about the tables, under the trees, in front of them, remind us of the boulevards of Paris. Notice the people we pass on the streets. What fair faces they have, and what very blue eyes. Scandinavia is the land of the blue eye and the tow head. There is a girl from the country. We have seen some dressed much like her in interior Norway. She wears a cap which comes down over her ears, rising in a peak at the front. Her short black skirt is of homespun, and her white waist has very full sleeves. She has on a long apron of red and blue stripes, and about her neck is a bright colored handkerchief. There is a little girl clad the same way. We shall see many dresses like those out in the country, although most of the city people dress as we do. But what is that huge building over there on the edge of the harbor? I mean the one with the wide terrace looking out over the water. That is the palace of the King of Sweden. It contains 800 rooms and is one of the fine buildings of Europe. The 2 countries of the Scandinavian peninsula were ruled by one king for many years, although each elected its own parliament which made all the laws for its people. This union between Norway and Sweden existed for nearly 100 years, but in 1905 Norway separated from Sweden and established an entirely independent kingdom. Both countries are constitutional monarchies, and their parliaments are known as the Storthing in Norway and the Diet in Sweden. It is provided by law that the kings of these countries must be of the Lutheran faith, for this is the established church of both Norway and Sweden. Soon we leave Stockholm for a trip out into the country. We visit some of the great factories for which Sweden is noted. We go down into the iron and copper mines and travel through many farming districts, not unlike those of Norway. The farms are exceedingly small. Some are not much bigger than a village lot, and some are so long and so narrow that you could hardly turn a dray about in them. Sweden has many thousands of such little farms. According to law, when a man dies, his land must be divided evenly among his children, so his farm is cut up into strips, and one strip is given to each child. Many of the strips are so small that there are no houses upon them. One man often owns a score of these little farms. You would not think that people could make much out of land so divided, but the Swedes are thrifty and they do very well. Their climate is so damp that grass grows luxuriantly, and they are such good dairymen that their butter and cheese sell well in all parts of northern Europe. We see quite as many women and children at work in the fields as in Norway. The women look odd with their sharp pointed caps, short skirts, and bright aprons. There comes one now with a baby slung to her back. The little one is wrapped up in a cloth, the ends of which are tied over the mother's breast. How can the woman possibly work with such a big load on her back? Her baby will surely fall off if she stoops down and tries to tie the grass into sheaves as the other women are doing. Yes, that is so, and she knows it, for as you see, she has unslung the baby and tied the two ends of the cloth in which it is wrapped to the branch of that tree, so that the little one swings to and fro in the breeze while the mother works. The Swedes are fond of their children. The usual cradle is a box with cords tied to its corners and brought together above the center, so that it can be hung to a hook from one of the rafters. A slight push sends the box swinging, and with the motion the little one drops off to sleep. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 20. In the German Empire. We have left Stockholm and are crossing the Baltic Sea on our way to the great German Empire. There are educated Germans on board, and as some of us speak German, we have no trouble in making ourselves understood. We have so many Germans in the United States that we feel more at home than at any other time since we left England. So we take our maps and try to get a general idea of the land and its people before we begin to explore it. We learn that the German Empire is composed of 26 states, of which the largest are Prussia and Bavaria, comprising about 3/4 of the whole. Prussia is much larger than all the others, and all the states are combined under its king into one great confederation for protection against the rest of the world, and to better themselves in commerce and trade. What a magnificent country Germany is, and what an important position it holds on the continent of Europe. As we travel over it we shall see that it could hardly help being the home of a great people. It contains more land than any of the other European states, except Russia and Austria-Hungary, and nearly every bit of its territory is good for something. The most of the empire is one vast farm, divided up into small fields which are kept like gardens. It has millions of acres of vineyards, grain fields, and pastures, and it raises vast quantities of wheat and rye, oats and barley, potatoes and sugar beets. It has some of the finest cattle of Europe and is noted as a stock-raising country. Germany stands next to Great Britain among the mining countries of Europe. It has mountains rich in silver, lead, zinc, copper, and tin. It has more than 1,000 iron mines and rich coal fields not far from the iron, so that a vast manufacturing industry has risen upon them. The land is a beehive of all kinds of industries. It has hundreds of factories which make machinery alone, and among them are some of the largest in the world. One covers more than 1,000 acres, and another, just outside of Berlin, has built more than 4,000 railroad locomotives. But Germany has other natural advantages in addition to its fat soil and rich mines. Its position and the lay of the land fit it for the home of a great trading people. It is situated in the heart of Europe, surrounded on all sides by rich nations. It touches the greatest of the European states, and does business with all of them. On the west are the French, the Belgians, and the Dutch, all manufacturing people, and all anxious to buy and sell. On the south are the Austrians, the Swiss, and also the Italians, for they are accessible by the tunnels through the Alps, while on the east is the vast population of Russia. The Baltic Sea gives an easy sea road to Norway and Sweden, furnishing northern Germany an outlet to the ocean, while the safe ports of Bremen and Hamburg make the English the next-door neighbors of Germany, and give it access to America and all other parts of the world. Now look at the lay of the land. Germany consists chiefly of a vast rolling plain, gently sloping toward the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. It is a part of the lowland of Europe, which, beginning in Russia, extends westward to the Atlantic Ocean. Farther south the land rises. The plateau of Bavaria begins and slopes upward to the foothills of the Alps, so that the whole of Germany may be called the northern slope of those mountains. What should be the condition of such a country? It should have plenty of water, for the streams from the mountains would flow through it. It should have navigable rivers, for the slope is so gentle the streams would flow slowly. And it might have canals, for it is easy to cut canals through a country comparatively level. This is the condition of Germany. The empire has great waterways, which with their branches enclose it almost like a net. On the west, the Rhine, fed by alpine glaciers and snows, forms a wide trade route from the south to the north. A few miles to the eastward is the Weser, another large river, and farther east the Elbe, carrying thousands of boats to and from the ocean. Still farther to the eastward are the Oder and the Vistula, which flow into the Baltic Sea. They are great waterways, loaded with traffic during most of the year. All these rivers have navigable branches, and their main streams run almost parallel with one another. Their channels have been deepened in places, and such a system of canals has been constructed between them that they give the western, central, and northern parts of Germany an almost perfect system of commercial waterways. In addition, the great Danube River rises in southern Germany and furnishes a trade route to Austria-Hungary and the Black Sea, connecting Germany with Asia. Is this not a fine water system? It has so many rivers and canals that if they were joined end to end they would make a navigable highway 9,000 miles long, or more than twice as long as the main stream of the Mississippi-Missouri, the longest river of the world. Now observe the lacework of steel tracks which covers the German Empire. The land lies so that the railroads could be easily built throughout every part of it. We shall have no difficulty in going wherever we please, for Germany has more railroads than any other country except the United States. From Berlin there is scarcely a city in Europe that cannot be reached in 24 hours, and fast express trains are always shooting back and forth across the empire from one part of the continent to another. All the great trade routes go through Germany. By the tunnels of the Alps the cars bring the passengers and goods from Asia, Africa, and Australia through Italy into Germany and other parts of northern Europe. There are fast express trains which cross Bavaria on their way from Paris to Constantinople, and there are railroads to Russia, in addition to the enormous system required for the business of the country itself. But something more than a fertile soil, rich mines, a network of railroads, good seaports, and navigable rivers is needed to make a country great in manufacturing and commerce. It is necessary that it have a thrifty people with a talent for trade. This is the nature of the Germans. They are among the best traders and manufacturers of the world, and there are so many of them that they hold a very important place in the world's commerce. Germany has a larger population than any other nation of Europe except Russia. Its people are steadily growing in number and are now pushing their commerce into all parts of the globe. The Germans are fast becoming a great colonial nation. They have colonies in Africa and China and own many islands in the Pacific Ocean. They have 5 times as much land outside Europe as at home. They have established their business houses in all parts of the world, not only in their own colonies but in all others, so that there is scarcely a place of any size in South America, Africa, or Asia where you may not find Germans selling goods, and buying raw materials and other things to be sent back to their people at home. There is one thing which everyone notices upon entering Germany, no matter where he comes in. This is the enormous fortifications which guard the country, and the soldiers who are to be seen everywhere. From now on we shall be awakened in the morning by the bugle of the trumpeters calling the companies to drill. We shall hear the military bands playing, and may have a chance to see some of the maneuvers or mock battles in which many regiments of cavalry and infantry practice at war. A rich land like Germany, surrounded by other countries, must always be on guard. Its frontier is more than 4,000 miles long, and at points of strategic importance enormous fortresses have been built and military camps established. Railroads have been constructed so that soldiers can be sent quickly to these camps and fortresses, and the telegraph lines connecting them with the capital and with one another have been laid in secret trenches under the ground, in order that they may not be easily found and cut by the enemy. Germany is always striving to improve her army. The people are proud of their soldiers, and indeed they have reason to be so, for they have one of the finest armies of the world. Every able-bodied man in the country must be a soldier, and in times of war boys of 17 may be called into the army. From the age of 20 to 27 every well man is expected to serve as a soldier, and this has made the army so large that if the Germans should have a war they could easily put 3,000,000 men in the field. We see something of these military defenses when, after crossing the Baltic, we land in the harbor of Kiel. We have come here to go through the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal, which has been cut through the land from the Baltic Sea to the mouth of the Elbe, in order that the German men of war and other ships may be able to go out to the sea without taking the long trip around Denmark. This canal is about 60 miles long. It is deep enough for the largest steam vessels and so wide that ships can easily pass. It was completed in 1895 at a cost of almost $40,000,000, but it is of enormous value to the Germans in the way of trade and in the defense of their empire. We steam into the long wide harbor of Kiel, passing many German war vessels moving on their way to and from the Baltic Sea. There are shipbuilding yards, docks fixed and floating, and many foundries and arsenals, making arms and fitting ships for war. This is the chief naval station of Germany, and there are many warships here ready to start forth if at any time Germany should have trouble with other nations. We are almost deafened by the din when we leave our steamer and walk through the vast works, and we enjoy coming out again into the busy city of Kiel and looking at the many merchant vessels which lie at the wharves. Most of them are on their way to or from the canal. We enter the canal early in the morning. Our ship is raised by a great lock from the harbor to the canal level. The gates in front of us are opened by machinery, and we steam slowly on toward the southwest. The ride takes the whole day. The distance is not so great, but there are so many ships going through that it is stipulated none shall steam faster than 5 miles an hour. How interesting it is! We can see far away on either side. The land is low and flat, and in many places sandy and swampy. Now we go by a meadow upon which fat Holstein cattle are feeding, and now a marsh where long-legged storks are wading about, poking their bills deep down into the mud searching for food. We see storks' nests on many of the farmhouses. There are windmills like those of Holland. We pass many ships and wave our handkerchiefs to the people on board. At last we enter the great lock at the end and are lowered down to the Elbe, where it flows out into the North Sea. Here our ship turns about, and we steam rapidly up the wide estuary of the Elbe, and within a few hours are passing through the shipping which belongs to the port of Hamburg. Our boat steams into the city, and when we step off, we are in one of the most important commercial centers of the world. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Geographical Reader Europe by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 21. The Seaports of Germany. Hamburg is one of the oldest cities of northern Europe. The Emperor Charlemagne built a castle here about 800 A.D., and even in the Middle Ages Hamburg had considerable trade. It is now the biggest seaport on the continent of Europe, and the chief outlet for Germany in its commerce by sea with the rest of the world. But why has Hamburg become the principal port of this part of Europe? You can see, if you will, but think for a moment of the vast industrial and commercial region behind it, and how closely it is connected with it by river and canal and by rail. Hamburg lies on the navigable Elbe, so far back from the sea that the shipping is safe from the storms, and here great highways of commerce between a great part of northern Europe and the rest of the world converge. On the Elbe itself goods are carried clear across Germany, and on its tributary, the Moldau, far into the great industrial province of Austria. All the heavy traffic for Berlin now goes from Hamburg by the Havel and Spree, and is thence taken by river and canal to the great waterways farther east. Hamburg has direct connection not only with our country and England, but also with the principal ports of South America, Australia, Africa, and Asia, as well as with those of other parts of Europe. It has a free port, that is, no duty is charged on goods which are brought into the port for transshipment. We see in the harbor not only German ships, but ships from all other countries. We are surprised at the number of vessels discharging goods from the United States. See that great steamer unloading cotton, the bales being lifted by derricks from the ship right into the warehouses. A little farther on is one taking off a cargo of meat, while others are unloading wheat and corn in vast quantities. Germany is one of our best customers. We supply its cotton mills with raw materials and also furnish a large part of its food, for although the land is rich, it does not raise enough to feed all the people. There is a tank steamer which has just arrived with a load of petroleum. That cargo came from the wells of Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. It was carried in pipes to the Atlantic seaboard and will soon be on its way to light the lamps in the homes of the Germans all over the empire. The Germans consume a great deal of our copper, pig iron, and steel, and within recent years we have been sending them many manufactured articles. The most of our trade with them is through Hamburg and the port of Bremen, on the Weser, not far away. Let us continue our walk along the wharves. What a lot of them there are, and what a variety of shipping! There is a 10,000-ton steamer which has just arrived with a cargo of wool. It came from Australia, stopping at the German colony of New Guinea on the way. There are tea and silk ships from China, and there are some starting out on their way to German Africa with all sorts of goods to be exchanged for palm oil, rubber, and ivory. There are English ships discharging manufactured goods, Italian ships unloading oranges, wines, and olive oil, vessels from Norway and Sweden loaded with lumber, steamers which have just arrived from the west coast of South America filled with nitrate of soda to fertilize the beet sugar farms, and steamers from Brazil with their cargoes of coffee and rubber. There are so many ships that our heads grow dizzy in trying to remember what they contain, and we give up in despair. We walk along wharf after wharf, past miles of such ships. The wharves are so arranged that the vessels come right to the warehouses. There are enclosed docks, such as we saw in London and Liverpool, and goods are also being unloaded into flatboats or barges to be towed by the canals through the city. There are railroad tracks everywhere, so that cars can be brought right to the ships and that freight handled quickly and cheaply. Many of the warehouses line the canals. Some of them have their upper stories projecting several feet above those below. They look like gigantic stairs turned upside down, and seem to be trying to reach out and rub noses with their neighbors on the other side of the waterway. Extending out from the roofs are beams holding pulleys, to which long ropes are attached, so that they hang down over the canal. There is one now, with a barge of wool bales just below. The men have wrapped the rope around one of the bales and fastened it tight. They have seized the other end of the rope, and, aided by the pulleys, are raising the bale high into the air. There! It has reached the third story of the building, where it is caught by a hook and pulled in through the barn-like doors which have been opened to receive it. Now we have left the ships and are walking through the main business streets of the city. Did you ever see anything finer? The stores contain beautiful goods, and the sidewalks are crowded with people as well dressed as those of New York. We visit the Stock Exchange about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and look down upon the thousands of brokers and merchants who are buying and selling. The din is as great as that of our Stock Exchange in Wall Street, but the language used is the German, and the brokers shout their words so rapidly that we cannot understand them. We stroll along the Binnenalster, a great walled pond in the heart of the city, and then go out to the Zoological Gardens to see the collections of lions, tigers, and other wild beasts for which Hamburg is noted. This place has long been famous as a wild animal market. The ships from Africa, Asia, Australia, and the islands of the Pacific bring wild beasts with them for sale, and anyone who wishes can get an elephant, a monkey, a kangaroo, or a boa constrictor, if he will but pay the price. It is only a short ride by rail from Hamburg to Bremen on the river Weser, about 40 miles from the sea. This is the other chief port by which Germany has access to the ocean, and from it many of the German immigrants sail for America. We see a ship starting out as we walk along the wharves. There is a crowd of men, women, and children at the stern, waving with their hats, shawls, and handkerchiefs a last farewell to their friends and the fatherland. There are other emigrants going on the vessels near by, for many, many thousand Germans leave Hamburg and Bremen every year to find homes in the United States. They think America is the best of all foreign countries, and they come to America to work, knowing that they can soon save enough to have homes of their own. They make excellent citizens, and we are glad to have them come. We spend a few hours in examining this quaint old city of Bremen. We visit its factories, including its enormous establishments for making cigars, snuff, and smoking tobacco, and then take a train for a rapid look at the ports of the Baltic, first stopping at Lubeck, on a little river about 10 miles from the sea. Have you ever heard of the Hanseatic League? If not, be sure not to say so in Lubeck, for every child here, no matter if he be so poor that he wears wooden shoes, is proud that his city was once a part of it. This league was for 2 centuries and more very important in the commerce of the world. It was organized during the 13th century by many of the great cities of different parts of Europe. The people of these cities banded together to better their trade, and to protect it from the pirates who then infested the seas, and from the robber barons who lived in castles along navigable rivers and exacted heavy tolls from all passing vessels. The League provided transport ships and maintained a powerful military force to protect them. The first 2 cities of the League were Lubeck and Hamburg, after which came Bremen, Danzig, Berlin, Cologne on the Rhine, Bruges in Belgium, and more than 70 others. These cities had their own factories and fisheries. They had their own ships, and they also had caravans of goods going across Europe. Their merchants attended all the great fairs, to which people from everywhere came to buy and sell, and the cities gradually grew very rich and powerful. Of these League cities, Lubeck was the capital, and Hamburg and Bremen were of great importance. They all remained independent towns for many years after the others had come under the rule of kings, and it is only within a short time that they have been absorbed by the great German Empire. We find in Lubeck many quaint old houses, some of which were put up centuries ago. The city still has considerable commerce, but the discovery of America was the death blow to its supremacy. Hamburg, which is only 39 miles away, has absorbed most of its trade, and it is now even smaller than it was during the Middle Ages. From Lubeck we go by rail to Stettin. The city is on both sides of the river Oder, some distance in from the Baltic Sea. It is an important port, for it is the most southerly point that can be reached by ships from the Baltic Sea laden with goods for Germany. It has a fine harbor, and is connected by the Oder and canals with all parts of North Germany, its waterways being joined with those of the Elbe and also with the Vistula. Stettin is only 84 miles from Berlin, and a great deal of freight is landed here for that city, being taken there by railroad as well as by the river and the canals. We visit the shipbuilding yards, where the biggest of the German vessels are constructed, and then take a train for Danzig, the commercial center of northeastern Germany, at the mouth of the Vistula. Danzig is built on two arms of the Vistula, about 5 miles from the sea. It has been called the Northern Venice, from the canals running through it. Many of its houses are built upon piles. Some have 6 or 7 stories, with quaint roofs and old-fashioned doors. We see large warehouses with boats anchored before them, and rafts piled high with wheat, which have come down the Vistula from the rich farms of eastern Prussia and Poland. The wheat is here transferred to vessels which take it to other parts of Germany by way of the Baltic Sea, after which the rafts are broken up and sold, and their owners go back to their homes on foot. There are rafts of lumber brought down the same way, and also queer river boats loaded with all sorts of produce. There are boats starting up the river with manufactured goods and other things which have come in by sea. Danzig is the outlet for all the timber grown in the basin of the Vistula. It has a great trade with East Germany and brings much produce down from Russian Poland as well. It is the chief military post of the northeastern part of the empire, and there are great forts all around it with thousands of soldiers to guard it. There is one fact in the history of Danzig that we are likely to recall frequently, especially in the midst of summer and winter, when we are always asking how the thermometer stands. It was in this city that the man who first perfected the thermometer was born, and it was here that he died, A.D. 1736. His name was Fahrenheit, and so when you are told that the temperature is so many degrees Fahrenheit above or below zero, you may remember that it was a citizen of Danzig who has enabled us to know just how hot or how cold it is. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Geographic Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 22, Berlin, the capital of Germany. We start out from our hotel in Berlin this morning to learn something of the capital of the German Empire. The sun is shining and the city looks wonderfully beautiful under its rays. The blocks of light yellow houses, 4, 5, and 6 stories high, seem to have received a fresh coat of paint. The gilding and carving on the palaces and great public buildings stand boldly out, and the statues of marble and bronze, which are to be seen in the squares, on the bridges, and in the gardens and parks, seem almost alive. The policemen strut about as spick and span as so many dandies. There are soldiers and officers in uniforms among the well-dressed people on the sidewalks, and the whole city looks new. We drive through one long street after another, our carriage on its rubber-tired wheels moving along noiselessly over the asphalt pavements. The streets are wide and well kept. There is not a scrap of paper to be seen on the roadways, although some of them are still in the hands of the cleaners. See those little boys in caps and uniforms who are pushing the dirty water toward the sewers? They are scrubbing the streets with rubber mops, which leave them as clean as a floor. Berlin pays $500,000 a year to keep its streets free from dirt, and a large part of the work is done by boys who receive 25 cents a day. How orderly everything is! The Germans are noted for doing things methodically. The whole country moves like a machine. The police are on hand everywhere to enforce the laws, and there are so many policemen that we are seldom out of their sight. The moment we arrived at our hotel, we were given a paper upon which we had to set down just who we were, what our business or profession was, and whether we should stay long in the city or not. The government rules are such that the officials know where each man in Prussia sleeps every night. When we came out this morning, we found the servants cleaning the pavement in front of the hotel. We are told that the family on the ground floor has to clean the pavement in front of the house every morning, and are warned that if we break a bottle or jug on the street, the police will make us pick up the pieces and carry them off. The Berlin boys dare not shoot with blowpipes at the birds in the trees. In the winter, when there is good skating, the police put up green flags to let the children know they may skate, and they mark out with red flags the parts of the ice they are permitted to use. Companies of children are not allowed to go about alone after dark, and if a child makes a noise on the street, his parents may be punished. In Berlin, the police watch even the dogs, and they warn you that your dog must not bark on the streets later than 10 o'clock in the evening. There are also fire police who aid in putting out fires, and building police who see that the mortar and rubbish of new buildings are kept inside the walls, and that no one puts up a building or even a business sign unless his plans have been approved by the officials. The people are proud of their city, and they will not allow anything erected which will injure its beauty. But what are the little towers we see on the street corners? Each is as big around as a hogshead and about 15 feet high. It is covered with printed matter containing various announcements. Those are the advertising stands of the city, which announce what is going on at the concert halls and theaters, and give all sorts of information valuable to strangers. In one section of the tower is a plan of the streets about it, so that we can know just where we are. The tower gives the location of the nearest police station, hospital, fire alarm, and post office. There are also some advertisements in frames, but nothing ugly or out of place. The city authorities will not allow bills to be posted upon the walls, and those who advertise must use these towers or hire men to distribute handbills. Such advertising is far better than that of the ugly billboards which so deface the streets of our American cities. We conclude to get a general idea of Berlin by riding about it on the Ringbahn and Stadtbahn. The Ringbahn is a steam railroad which runs around the outskirts of the city. The trip shows us what a great place Berlin is. The city covers more than 25 square miles. It lies in and extends beyond the Spree River Valley, which is here about 3 miles in width. The country about is so sandy and marshy that Berlin was once nicknamed the sandbox of Europe. It is an old city, although it has been growing so fast of late years, and has been so much improved that it now looks new. Its oldest part is on an island in the Spree. There was a town there several hundred years before America was discovered. The Spree River gave the people access by the Havel to the waterways of the Elbe, and canals were made later by which they could get to the Oder. The town was situated just where the trade routes to different parts of northern Europe crossed, and so the city soon became important. Later it was made the capital of Prussia, and it continued to grow. Then, in 1870, the Germans had their great war with the French and conquered them. After this, the Prussians persuaded the other German states to unite with them into one empire, of which the King of Prussia should be the emperor, and Berlin the imperial capital. Since then, people from all the states of Germany have come to Berlin, and it has rapidly increased in size, wealth, and importance. It is now, next to Paris, the finest capital on the continent of Europe, and its people think it will soon be surpassed in size only by the city of London. We cross many railroads in our ride on the Ringbahn. There are hundreds of smokestacks on the outskirts, pouring their black columns into the sky. They belong to the factories of the city. Berlin is perhaps the greatest manufacturing town of continental Europe. It has silk, woolen, and cotton mills. It has vast engine factories, and it makes beautiful gold and silverware, fine jewelry, and all sorts of fancy goods and notions, as we shall see in the stores where we shop. Much of the work is done by the people in their homes, and there are hundreds of small factories as well as many large ones. The Stadtbahn is an elevated railroad built upon a wall of masonry and iron. We cross the Spree 3 times during our ride upon it, and go over bridges which have been built above the principal streets. We leave the cars not far from the Thiergarten, and take carriages for a drive through this, the great park of Berlin. It contains 600 acres, and looks like a cultivated forest, with lakes, little canals, and many beautiful walks and drives. We visit the zoological garden, where we see the keepers feed the wild beasts, and in the monkey house see the largest collection of monkeys in Europe. In our drive through the Avenue of Victory, the chief promenade of the park, we pass scores of well-dressed men and women riding fine horses. There are beautiful carriages with coachmen and footmen in livery, and hundreds of children with their parents or nurses walking about, or playing near the lakes and under the trees. The Germans are fond of nature, and even at daybreak there are people in the park. On going out we drive by a sandstone column 200 feet tall, with a beautiful gilt statue of Victory on top. It was erected in honor of the victories of the Germans over the French. We then pass out through the Brandenburg Gate into Unter den Linden. This gate is a huge stone structure with 5 entrances, one of which is reserved for the king. It has on its top a magnificent statue of the goddess of Victory, riding in a bronze chariot drawn by 4 bronze horses. That statue was captured by Napoleon when he conquered the Prussians. It was taken to Paris, but was brought back again after the Battle of Waterloo. We are delighted with Unter den Linden. It is the finest street of the city and one of the famous streets of the world. It is as wide as Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, and is about a mile long, extending from the Thiergarten to the palaces of the king. It has 7 different roadways or paths, some for heavy vehicles, others for carriages, some for people on horseback, and others for bicycles and pedestrians. We ride through it under the trees, admiring the large public buildings, going by the statue of Frederick the Great and the royal palaces, and then, on turning to the right and to the left, making our way through miles of other streets walled with magnificent buildings. We ride through Friedrich Street and Leipziger Street, by many beautiful stores, and go on, seeing big buildings everywhere. There are no little houses in Berlin, such as you see in other cities, and no cottages with gardens in front of them, so we wonder where the poor live. We soon discover when we get out for a walk. Their homes are scattered everywhere throughout the city. Very few people own the houses they live in. Nearly all hire flats or apartments, so that you find the rich, the well-to-do, and the poor in the same house. Each family has its own quarters and its own floor, according to what it can pay. In all Berlin, it is said, there are only a few thousand families who have a whole house to themselves, while a multitude have less than 6 rooms, and vast numbers of families live in 2 or 3 rooms and in basements or cellars under the ground. Let us go into one of the big buildings and see for ourselves. The one we enter has 6 stories, extending back from the street. It is built about several great courts, each walled with 6 tiers of rooms. We first go into the cellar-like basement. At the front are the shops of a butcher, a cobbler, and a grocer, while farther back, each living in 2 or 3 rooms, are many poor families, the most of whom do work at home for a livelihood. On the first floor facing the street there are some good stores, not unlike our stores at home. There is a restaurant at the corner, while in the courts at the back of the building are small shops and homes. Entering the hall, we climb the stairs to the first story, and there find a number of well-to-do families, each of which has 6 or more comfortable rooms opening into one another. On the floors farther up we find other apartments, smaller and less elaborately furnished, the homes of people who are not so rich as those just below, for the rent grows less the higher you go. It is in apartments like these that the most of the Berliners live. Often the poor work in the same room where they sleep, and many families have but one room that can be heated. Such buildings in our cities would have hot air furnaces, or steam or hot water to heat them. Here the people have stoves of porcelain, each so big that it fills one corner of the room, reaching from the floor almost to the ceiling. Near the bottom of the stove is a brass door a foot square, and inside this an iron door which opens into a little fuel chamber. A small amount of coal with some kindling is put in. This will heat the bricks and porcelain, and once hot the stove gives forth heat the whole day. Coming out, we walk through one street after another. The most of them are full of people rapidly moving to and fro. There are men and women of all classes, rich and poor, old and young. Here come some students from the university, and behind them boys with bags of books returning from school. On the corners are messengers in caps and uniforms, ready to take bundles or notes for anyone at a few cents a trip. There are women and men carrying baskets and boxes in their arms and on their backs, and business men and mechanics rapidly moving along. What is that black-faced little boy coming toward us? He has a pole over his shoulder to which a long brush is attached, and he carries a short brush in his hands. He does not look like a Negro. No, he is a German boy, and his business is sweeping out chimneys. There are hundreds of chimney sweeps in Berlin, boys and men who go down into the chimneys and clean them out once a year. Be careful in crossing the streets. They are full of vehicles of every description. There are automobiles moved by steam and electricity. There are many street cars. There are carriages of all kinds and wagons and carts. There are great drays dragged along by horses and little wagons hauled by dogs. There is a dog now pulling a load of fresh meat through the street. He looks very hungry, and we wonder why he does not turn about and take a good meal until we see the wire muzzle enclosing his head. All dogs must have muzzles, or they will be taken up by the police or the dog catchers. Get out of the way of that carriage. Don't you hear the driver hissing at you? That is the way you are warned to look out in Berlin. If you allow yourself to be run over, you may be arrested and fined, for every person on foot is expected to take care of himself. What a lot of restaurants, hotels, and cafes there are everywhere. We are inclined to think that the chief occupation of the people of Berlin is eating, till we see the thriving general business going on all around us. The Germans are fond of good living. There are many delicatessen or cook shops where you can buy cakes and pies, sausages, and all kinds of cooked meat to take home. There are plenty of restaurants, and at frequent intervals are cafes where you can have a cup of coffee or chocolate or some other liquid. Beer is sold almost everywhere, for it is the favorite drink of the Germans. They take it with their meals, and also in the beer gardens, where they sit about at tables under the trees and drink while they listen to the playing of the bands. Early one morning we go to the market. It is in an enormous building roofed with glass, covering 6 acres of ground. It has 500 wholesale dealers and commission merchants and many retailers. The most of the small dealers are women who stand behind marble counters loaded with vegetables, dressed fowls, and meats of all kinds. What a lot of geese there are! The Germans are so fond of this fowl that Berlin alone consumes 2 millions of them every year. It is no wonder the cab drivers hiss, they eat so much goose. There is a woman now bringing in a half-dozen geese in a basket. She is one of the porters, for the women here do such work more cheaply than men. We see them everywhere in the market, going about with great baskets of meat and vegetables strapped to their backs, or standing with their empty baskets waiting to carry provisions home. One part of the market is devoted to fish, of which Berlin eats 40 million pounds every month. The people are determined to have their fish fresh, and hence buy them alive. We walk by one vat after another, watching the fish swimming about in the water, and are told we may choose any we wish, and the fishwife will dip it out with her net. We have no difficulty in finding the butter and cheese market. We have only to follow our nose and let them follow the smell. Most German cheese has a strong odor, and some kinds, such as Limburger, scent the whole building. The Germans use more cheese than we do, and the poorer classes eat it as food rather than as a relish or for dessert. The German butter is sweet and of good flavor. Much of it is sold wrapped up in cabbage leaves, the golden butter surrounded by green. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 23. The Emperor. How Germany is Governed. We see the Emperor several times during our stay in Berlin. He often rides about through the city on horseback. He reviews his soldiers in person, and sometimes drives through the Thiergarten in his imperial carriage. He wears the uniform of a general of his army, and although he has great dignity, he looks much like other men. We are surprised to see how his subjects revere and admire him. They speak low when talking about him, and when they must meet him, the men and boys take off their hats and the women bow. When he rides or drives out in procession, the roofs, balconies, windows, and pavements are full of people. The women wave their handkerchiefs, the men throw their hats in the air, and all cry out "Hoch, hoch, hoch," which means much the same as "Hurrah!" The German Emperor is one of the chief rulers of Europe. He is known as the Deutscher Kaiser, or German Emperor, and also as the King of Prussia. As Kaiser he governs about 60 million people, and he has always more than 500,000 soldiers at his command, while at short notice he can put several times this number of men into the field. The German army has some of the best trained soldiers of the world. We find them drilling almost everywhere in and about Berlin. We are wakened in the morning by their tramp, tramp, tramp as they pass our hotel on their way from one part of the city to another, and we often see regiments of infantry and cavalry in the streets. In the drills the companies move like so many machines, and even the cavalry horses are taught to take just so many steps to the minute. In the maneuvers or sham battles the army is divided, and thousands of soldiers fight other thousands for practice, using blank cartridges, but otherwise acting just as in real war. The Germans are proud of their army, and all officials and soldiers are highly respected. As we have already learned, every man here must be a soldier for a part of his life, and everyone must be ready to go out and fight if the Emperor calls upon him. But is it not a dangerous thing for one man to have so many soldiers at his command? It might be if the Emperor had the ambition of an Alexander the Great or a Napoleon Bonaparte, and desired to conquer the world. We must also remember that the German Emperor has not absolute power over the army or over his people. He can call out his soldiers at any time to defend the country, if it should be invaded, but he cannot make an offensive war without the consent of the upper house of the German Parliament. We have seen how the United Kingdom, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, and Norway, and Sweden each has its king or queen who rules through a Congress or Parliament which votes all the money and makes all the laws, so that these monarchies are very like republics with hereditary presidents. It is much the same in the German Empire, save that in local matters each state has a king or prince of its own. The Kaiser has such a position as King of Prussia, but as Emperor he is more like our President, having to do only with matters that affect all the states, and that only in connection with an Imperial Congress. This Congress consists of two houses, the Bundesrat, which has 61 members, appointed by the governments of the states for each session, and the Reichstag, which has 397 members, elected for terms of 5 years by all the people of Germany. In both houses there are more Prussian representatives than any others, for Prussia has by far the most people and is the most powerful of all the states. We visit the Reichstag Building. It is a gorgeous structure decorated with statues, carvings, and gold leaf, situated close by the Thiergarten. We pass the uniformed guards at the entrance and in the halls, and take seats in the galleries. We listen to the members debating, observing that Germany has political parties just as we have. The scenes of the Reichstag are much like those of our House of Representatives at Washington, while the Bundesrat is more like our Senate. Afterward we go with our guide to the great palace of the Emperor, which stands at the head of Unter den Linden, on an island surrounded by the two branches into which the Spree divides at this point. The building is constructed about 4 courts. It is of vast extent, containing 600 different rooms. All the rooms are beautifully furnished, and we enjoy seeing the fine statues and paintings. The ceilings are high, and the floors so polished that the palace attendant gives us each a pair of big felt slippers to wear over our shoes as we walk through. From this palace we go to others near by. after which we visit the Zeughaus, or arsenal, full of arms of all kinds, and then go to the great museums and picture galleries for which Berlin is famous. We spend some time in the university. It is one of the largest in Germany, having over 7,000 students. We visit the other schools which are scattered everywhere near the city, and learn that the Germans have an excellent school system and that they are among the best educated people of the world. They have day schools and night schools. They have hundreds of academies and universities which are so good that scholars from all parts of Europe and also from our country attend them. In the Royal Library is one of the largest book collections in Europe, including the first Bible ever printed with movable type. This was made by Gutenberg, 42 years before Columbus discovered America, and it might be called the father of the millions of books now printed each year. We next go to the Stock Exchange, the financial center of the empire, and watch the brokers buying and selling just as we saw them in the other great cities. The Germans are fast growing rich, and they have many large banks. They have fine stores everywhere, and in our travels through Berlin we find numerous evidences of their wealth and prosperity. There is no lack of amusements in the German capital. There are more than a score of theaters, a large opera house partially supported by the government, and so many concert halls that we can hear good music in almost every block. We enjoy especially the military bands which play in the parks. We take excursions to the great resorts in the suburbs of Berlin, and spend one day at Potsdam on the Havel, a half hour by rail from the capital. Here the imperial family have their summer palaces surrounded by beautiful gardens. There are many fine buildings, each of which has its history and features of interest. In the Palace of Sans Souci, for instance, we are shown the chamber, or grotto, walled and sealed with shells and minerals and precious stones, which Frederick the Great constructed during one of his wars. According to the story of our guide, Frederick had spent almost all his money in fighting, and his enemies, thinking he was at the end of his resources, were preparing to crush him. Then he began to build this gorgeous jewel chamber, pouring money into it as though there was no end to his wealth. Its extravagance made his enemies think he had all the money he needed, and caused them to withdraw from the field. Not far from Sans Souci is Babelsberg, which was the favorite summer home of Kaiser Wilhelm I, who, after he defeated the French in 1871, was chosen the first German emperor. It is very beautiful, and so plainly furnished that it seems more like the home of a rich citizen than like the palace of an emperor. Wilhelm I was noted for his simplicity and kindness. Many stories are told of his love for children. He was especially fond of flowers. There is one flower which grows wild all over northern Germany, which is often called the Kaiserblume, or the emperor's flower. It is like a dandelion in form. Its petals are a bright navy blue. We gather great bunches of it as we walk through the country, and find it everywhere in the grain fields on the outskirts of Berlin. A story is told of two peasant children, who, having heard that the Kaiser loved these flowers, gathered some for him, and walked all alone several miles into Berlin. Here they had much trouble in finding the palace where the emperor lived, but at last they succeeded. A guard dressed in gorgeous uniform met them at the gate. He looked so grand that they supposed he was the emperor, and with great trembling told him their errand. He was about sending them away unsatisfied, when a plain, kind-looking old man came out and asked what they wanted. At first the guard stepped back, and the little ones again told their story. The old man took the bouquet and asked them to come in, saying he would present the flowers to His Majesty. He gave them seats in a beautiful room. A moment later a soldier appeared and told the children that the Kaiser would see them. They then went with the soldier into another room, which was even more beautifully furnished, and there they saw the same kind old man who had let them in. He held their flowers in one hand and reached out the other to them, shaking hands with them and patting them on the head. It was the emperor himself. He talked with the little ones for a moment, and ordered his servants to show them the palace. After this he gave each a present, and sent them home, the happiest and proudest children in Germany. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 24, Rural and Manufacturing Germany. We have left the capital and are traveling leisurely from place to place by rail through the great German Empire. How clean the stations are, and how orderly everything is! The station agents and railroad guards are in uniform. They are public officials, for the railroads here belong to the government. They tell us just where to go and just what we may and may not do. We are locked in during our journeys and must be at the stations a quarter of an hour before leaving time or wait for the next train. When we stop at a town, the officials give us a metal ticket bearing a number showing us just what cab we may take. Every station has its first, second, and third class waiting rooms, each with its restaurant, and there are first and second and sometimes third and fourth class cars. The fourth class cars are very uncomfortable, for the seats are hard wooden benches. We usually ride second class, for we wish to be with the people, and they are so economical that they seldom go first class. We visit Breslau, the second city of Prussia, the great wool and grain market on the Oder, and then cross over to Saxony and spend some time in Dresden on the Elbe and in Leipzig and Chemnitz. What a busy country Germany is, and how thrifty! The most of the farms are small, but they are kept like gardens. There are no fences, and we ride for miles over flat plains, which, with their different colored crops, look like a great patchwork quilt spread out before us. The barnyards have many fat cattle. They are usually kept shut up, and the grass is cut and brought to them. We frequently see flocks of sheep and geese watched by a woman who knits as she keeps them from straying. Now we are passing a smooth white road lined with trees. The rows seem to meet in the distance as the road stretches on and on. There is a woman with a flag guarding the railroad track while the train passes. Now we are going by a farm village close to the railroad. The houses are of brick or stucco, with roofs of red tile or gray thatch, and with great rafters or beams set into the walls. The houses are built close to the street, with gardens behind them. The people do not live on their farms, but in these little villages, and go out to their work. Observe how carefully the farming is done. There are many fields of wheat and rye, and many of beets, for beet sugar is one of the chief exports of Germany. The beets are hoed frequently and are kept perfectly free of weeds. They are cut up and boiled in steam reservoirs to get out the sugar, which is shipped to the markets all over the world. What a lot of women there are at work in the fields! So many of the men are in the army that the women and girls do all sorts of hard labor. In some fields there are more women than men. We see them hoeing and spading. They aid in the harvesting, turning the grass with pitchforks that it may dry the more quickly. They rake it together and even help load it. They do much of the carting, too. For instance, in one of the smaller cities through which we pass, we see a woman driving a yoke of oxen. They are drawing a farm wagon loaded with beets, grown on a farm several miles away. In Bavaria, one may see women sawing wood or breaking stones on the streets of the cities. They sometimes carry mortar for the masons, and also drag about little carts loaded with milk or vegetables, aiding the dogs which are harnessed up with them. They receive lower wages than the men, although they work very hard. We are delighted with Dresden. It is the capital of the Kingdom of Saxony and is one of the finest cities of Europe. The city seems one great museum. There are so many statues, fine buildings, and collections of curiosities and art. Even the palace of the king has a museum in it, and a very wonderful museum, too. It is the treasure chamber of the royal family, and is called the Green Vault. It is filled with curiosities and jewels, with gold and silver plate, and with wonderful carvings of gold, silver, and ivory. We walk through room after room, looking at the golden dishes and precious cups and vases. We see all sorts of queer little figures of men and animals, made of misshapen pearls, and stay long before the green diamond, which weighs 5½ ounces and is one of the largest diamonds known. In the Dresden Picture Gallery we are shown one of the finest collections of paintings, including the Sistine Madonna of Raphael, considered by many to be the most beautiful picture ever painted. We visit the Historical Museum, the Japanese Palace, and other such places, until we are tired of paintings and statues and are glad to get out among the people in the Grosser Garten, the royal park of the city, or to sit down for a drink of lemonade upon the Brühl Terrace, which borders the Elbe, where every evening there are hundreds of people walking about or sitting at the tables under the trees, listening to the music for which the Germans are famous. A short ride from Dresden brings us to Leipzig, the chief commercial city of Saxony. It is situated on a plain at the junction of several rivers, so that it forms one of the best supply and shipping points for the manufacturing districts of Saxony. Leipzig has many factories, and it is also the greatest book publishing town of the world. It has 500 booksellers and 100 printing offices, in which are made more than 60 million books every year. It holds book fairs which are attended by booksellers from all over Germany. It is a great educational center, and its university has 1,000 students. It has fairs at which furs, leather, cloth, glass, and other things are sold, and also has long been noted as a leather market. We have seen many factories during our travels through Germany. Each district has its manufacturing towns, and the country fairly hums with moving machinery. Saxony is more like the Midlands of England than any part of the European continent. The country is more thickly settled than almost any place in the world except some provinces of China, and it is doubtful whether any part of China has more people to the acre than this region where we are now. Why is this so? We have learned that such conditions always have their geographical reasons, and it is not hard for us to see some of the reasons for the dense population and vast industries of Saxony. In the southern part of the kingdom are the Erzgebirge, or ore mountains, filled with minerals. There are large coal fields nearby, so that manufacturing can be done very cheaply. Saxony is noted for its sheep and fine wool, and great woolen mills have grown up here, which are shipping goods to all parts of Europe and to the United States. Any of our dry goods merchants can tell you something about this wool, and many American girls use the beautiful Saxony yarns for crocheting and knitting. The city of Chemnitz, southeast of Leipzig, has been called the Manchester of Germany. It makes about as many things as Manchester, England, and is almost as busy. We visit the great factories there and in the villages near by. Each of the villages is made up of some large workshops, with the plain, simple houses of the working people about them. As we go on with our trip, we are surprised at the many goods of all kinds which are made outside the factories. In some parts of Germany it is hard to find a house in which the people are not making something for sale. We saw thousands of workshops in the cellars of Berlin. There were thousands of little workshops in Leipzig and Breslau, and we have found vast numbers in the smaller towns and villages. In some houses the people are weaving the most beautiful silks, velvets, and plushes on hand looms. In others they are making woolens and linens in the same way. Here they are knitting stockings, there making clothing, while a little farther on we find them busy pounding out nails and carving beautiful things from wood. The work goes on in the mountains as well as on the plains. In the Thuringian forest, for instance, there are thousands of men, women, and children who are always making toys, and it is the same in and about the quaint old city of Nuremberg, Bavaria. Germany sells more toys than any other country, and many of those we see being made will be shipped to the United States in time for the next Christmas trade. The toy makers live in mean little houses. Many of them have but 2 rooms, and the air within is filled with the smell of fresh paint of the toys which are drying on boards laid on the stove. You would not think beautiful things could come out of such places, and it really seems hard that these people should labor so for our pleasure. They receive very low wages. The girls working on toys get less than 20 cents a day, and the men making mouth organs less than $3 a week. In the large establishments the wages are higher. But suppose we enter one of the factories and see how they make the doll babies which so delight the souls of our little sisters at home. We first visit the rooms where cheap wax dolls are made. The bodies of the dolls are of coarse white cloth stuffed with sawdust, and their heads, arms, and legs are of papier mache coated with wax. The different parts of the dolls are made in different houses, and many hands are engaged on each doll. Certain workmen cut the arms and legs out of wood or mold them and the heads out of papier mache. Others dip the arms and legs into basins of pink dye to give them a flesh color, while others paint the eyebrows, lips, and hair on the heads. Or if the dolls are to have something better than painted hair, mohair is glued on. There are other workmen who make dolls' eyes from glass tubes that they melt over gas flames and then blow into shape. They also fasten the eyes in the heads. So you see a doll baby that costs only 25 cents requires the work of many people before it is finished and dressed in its coarse cotton chemise ready for sale. The fine dolls require a great deal more work. Many of them have bisque heads made of kaolin, a fine clay which is molded into shape and then burned, just as we saw them burning china at Limoges in France and in Delft, Holland. After this the dolls' heads are painted and then burned again. The making of the wigs for some dolls is a fine art. Human hair is sometimes used in them, and dressing dolls is also an art which keeps thousands of women and girls busy year in and year out. How would you like to take a canary bird home to remind you of your travels in Germany? In the Harz Mountains and about Hanover there are thousands of people who raise canaries for sale. Nearly every little house has cages hung to the walls of its sitting room, bedroom, or garret, and each cage has one or more of these beautiful birds. In some of the cages the canaries are sitting, hatching their young. These cages have the floor covered with dried moss, of which the female bird shapes her nest, lining it with cotton or lint. She insists on making it for herself, and if a ready-made nest is supplied, will build another, sometimes tearing out her own feathers to build it. She lays from 4 to 6 eggs 3 or 4 times a year. It takes about 2 weeks for the eggs to hatch, and it is 6 weeks more before the little canary chicks are old enough to leave their mothers and have separate cages. The birds are encouraged to sing by being placed near older birds which sing well. In the autumn they are sold to bird merchants who ship them to all parts of the world. About 250,000 birds are raised in this way here every year, and of these many thousands are sent to the United States to be sold. The best singers come from the Harz Mountains, and each bring high prices, but ordinary birds sell for 75 cents or $1 apiece. The birds are shipped in cages to New York, with careful attendants who see that they are watered and fed every day. One man has charge of about 1,000 birds, each in its own little wooden cage, so that he has plenty to do during the voyage. The cages are made by the peasants in their homes, and the birds are raised chiefly by poor weavers or miners, who rely on them for a part of their support. The Harz Mountains are one of the chief mining districts of Germany. They contain all sorts of ores, and there are other regions, such as the Erzgebirge, the Thuringian, along the Rhine, in the valley of the Ruhr, and in Silesia, where coal, iron, and zinc, and other metals are found. There is one district in Prussia, not far from the Elbe, which contains wonderful salt mines. Here there are great beds of almost pure rock salt, with potash salts above them. The potash salts are used for making soap, glass, pottery, and gunpowder. They are also used, under the name of kainit, as a fertilizer, and as such are shipped in vast quantities to the United States to be sold to our farmers. And so we go on traveling about from one part of Germany to another. We visit Hanover, Halle, Nuremberg, Magdeburg, and many other large cities, stopping now and then in the busy manufacturing districts and other interesting places. At Meissen, near Dresden, we learn how the famous Dresden china is made. In Krefeld, on the west of the Rhine, we see looms weaving silks and velvets almost as fine as those of Lyons. And at Essen, on the east of that river, we visit the vast works of Krupp, where are hundreds of acres of iron foundries and rolling mills, with a forest of smokestacks filling the sky with dark clouds. We go through the shops. They are the largest of their kind in Europe, and have all sorts of machinery, some so fine that a single hammer weighing 50 tons is said to have cost $500,000. Everywhere we travel in Germany we find schools for teaching the most important branches of the manufacturing industries. In some towns the students learn how to make porcelain, in others they design patterns for weaving, and in others study all about working in wood, iron, and steel. There are business schools, farming schools, mining schools, and schools for educating boys in commerce and trade. Most of the schools have night sessions, and many of the mechanics attend them. These are very important to the country, for through them the Germans are fast becoming the most intelligent and most skilled workmen of Europe. They already rank next to the English as the chief of the European manufacturing nations. Their commerce is steadily increasing, and they are fast growing in industry and wealth. End of chapter 24.